I'm Scott Allen Miller, and on a regular basis, when I do videos of houses or property, someone writes in and says, Scott, look, we really appreciate that you're giving us this general guidance, and we get like this idea of how things compare to each other. But what many of us really need is absolute pricing. What is the value of this house? And everybody understands it. It's not the exact price you'll pay, but they need like, what is this house worth? Or what is it going to sell for within a pretty, we know what you mean, right? But there's a reason this can't be. And we've talked about this on a lot of videos, but I guess we don't extrapolate, or we don't take the things we talk about and extrapolate it into answering this exact question. I totally understand why everyone wants absolute pricing on a house. If I show a house that I can say, this would be an $80,000 house, you can go, okay, that's $80,000. I absolutely, 100% exactly understand what it is you're looking for. However, I need to explain, and I need to have a video I can link to for so many people who want this, so you understand why that's never going to be something that I or someone else can honestly give you. And someone who does give it to you, it's not going to be honest. We're going to talk about that right after the bump. The anthill behind me has grown into something completely insane. I can't believe how many ants we have here. Luckily, they're not like fire ants, so you don't have, it's not like a real danger, but they can cause problems for house foundations, and which is perfect for a video about real estate. And if you stand in them, they still bite, even though they're not like fire ants. And more than once, I've stood on an anthill while doing the videos, and it's unpleasant. So I've got 3 right behind me. The new rain, as it comes, tends to identify where they're at. So we're looking for some borax so that we can take care of them, because we can't let them continue as much as they're just friendly ants. They will destroy the house, so we got to take care of them, unfortunately. Okay, on to today's topic. So of course everyone wants concrete pricing, so you can look at the videos and say there's a price on a house. And if you look online, you'll find many people making videos here in Nicaragua and of course around the world where they show houses and give prices on them. The problem is, as we've discussed so often on this show, those prices are fake. In most places, they're going to be fake. Here in Nicaragua, they're guaranteed. They're just always going to be wild numbers based on nothing. And that's a real problem, because you ask for something someone's going to deliver. Basically, as a consumer of media, you're placing a demand that a certain bit of information is going to be provided to you. And this makes sense. We all say, hey, I want to watch videos about mountaineering. Well, someone's going to go mountaineer and make a channel for you because there's a demand for that. So if we demand that there be real pricing for houses, it's going to be produced. And a lot of people hope that I will produce it because you like my show. So I appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. But the problem is, one of the things that my show prides itself on is being honest and actually trying to inform you and help you. The problem being that since we can't get actual prices on houses, we'll explain in a minute, someone is going to deliver what you think you want. And so they're going to tell you what you want to hear. And they have to produce fake numbers because they don't have real ones. So what ends up happening is you start looking for a certain type of content. People are aware that you will look for that content, and they will provide it because there is a market vacuum, and you're going to get misleading information. So that's the worst possible outcome. Instead of learning from it, you're becoming manipulated by it. And so the first rule is, don't ask for something that someone can't provide. And this is something we get a lot here in Nicaragua. People often demand that they get information from a website rather than a YouTube video, or they want a website from the government, and if it isn't provided, they just won't accept certain things. And that's not how Nicaragua works. I totally understand that that's how the US or Canada or Germany works, for sure. But that's not how Nicaragua works. Public information is not put on a website unless it's the strict letter of the law. So if it's something like, what does the Constitution say? Yeah, that's online, easy to find. But if it's something like, what is the policy of this department within the government as far as what I have to do? So for example, we use this one a lot because it came up. There is an immigration law that says that in order to get your paperwork to get permanent residency, become an immigrant here in Nicaragua, you have to get signed off by the Department of Health. Pretty straightforward, very easy law. No one's arguing with that. However, when you then say, well, what are the requirements that you have to meet with the Department of Health? That's not specified in the law. That is an opinion at the time that things are happening with the Department of Health, with the Ministerio de Salud. And so you go to the ministry and say, what are my requirements? And maybe their requirement is you have to be a certain age, or you have to be of certain health. Maybe you have to have blood pressure of a certain type, or have to have a certain shot, whatever. Those things, pretty straightforward. However, Those things are not laws. Those things are policies. Policies of the Ministeria de Salud are not online. They don't have a website. They don't have a place to put that, and they have no one in charge of putting it up there. The only way to get that information is to go to the Ministeria de Salud and request it. And all you know is what it is that they tell you at that time. And it is authoritative in that moment. But is it going to still be authoritative tomorrow? We don't know. We can assume so. Why would it change? But it could. It has to change sometime. And when would that be? Tomorrow? In 10 years? It's random, or it's seemingly random to a person who doesn't know what the triggers are, so you just wait and have to check again. So we get a general bit of information. This is what it was like yesterday. This is what it was like a year ago. This is what we heard it was like 10 years ago. Here's what the trend is. We assume it's going to be pretty close to that in the future. But since there's not a website, since there isn't an official channel without checking in the moment, people get really frustrated. And I totally understand why. This makes sense. This is a frustrating experience, because it's very few people doing it, and it is kind of unique in many situations, and it can vary by departamento and all kinds of things. And if it does vary by departamento, they don't want to advertise those things online and have people shift around to different departamentos to play the system. They want you to go and find out, and then they'll make their decisions. So when it comes to the law, yeah, people understand. We're going to put it online. It's going to be easy to find. If you demand information, such as, well, I will not accept any information, and we heard this a lot with this specific thing, unless it's online, it allowed people to then start creating their own realities and demanding what they wanted to be told. And of course, there's plenty of people who are going to tell them that. Someone's happily going to spin up a website or just give you a narrative that tells you what you want to hear, especially if there's any way that they can leverage that, even just potentially, into making money. If there's no way to make money, probably no one's going to bother to do that. But it's really easy, even if you don't realize it, to make money off of you. At least statistically, 5 out of 10 people who do this will fall for the trick and end up paying for something, hiring someone, doing something that changes how their money changes hands based on this misinformation. So if it's something you demand, someone's going to supply it. So a really important life lesson, but really important when it comes to something like relocating to Nicaragua, is you never want to demand or force a situation where, in order to meet your needs, in order to placate you, someone has to provide you misinformation. That doesn't mean that people won't go out and make misinformation anyway and try to confuse you or manipulate you. Of course they will. But it's really important that we don't trigger that situation. We want to say, what real information is there available? How can I work with it? And so that's where we really want to get you today, because everyone who says, well, Scott, you got to give us this thing. I want you to understand that this is a situation where I can't have that information. No human can. There's nobody, no agency, nobody who can give you this information. But by demanding it, and I understand people aren't being belligerent and demanding it, they're just like, Scott, this is what I want. Totally understand. But having that mindset puts you in a dangerous spot. You're looking for something you shouldn't be looking for. And I totally understand, again, that it's something you want, so why not go out and seek it? But it's just an important thing as a researcher to say, is this something that anybody could provide? And if it's pretty certain that nobody could provide this information, then anybody who is providing it is super suspect at best and just flat out deceiving you at worst. And so we need to be really suspect of that. And so this mindset has this is what I want. I'm asking Scott for it. So if you're asking me for it, that we presume that you believe I have a way to produce it. Maybe you think it's a lot of effort. Maybe you are like, Scott, it's worth the effort. Go do this. Okay, but that can't be done. But that leaves you prey to someone who claims that they have done it. Clearly, you haven't internalized that it can't be done and that any information like that would be false. So why does it have to be false? Before we dive into that, a little housekeeping. Just remember that if you'd like to sponsor the show, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Alan Miller. It does cost a lot to do the show, so I really appreciate when you guys donate, because we don't charge for anything. We don't sell any services, really. We don't sell any products. We don't have any relocation, packages to get you to buy or anything like that. So your donations are really all we live on to pay all the expenses of this show. So very much appreciated when you guys help that out. And as well, check out the show notes. There is information about the 2 GoFundMes that we're helping push. Ivonne, who worked for us a few years ago, she has a horrendously slipped disc. She's been through a few surgeries. She needs a private surgery for that and is trying to raise money for the surgery. And Marcela, who is my producer, has Hodgkin's lymphoma, and we're helping support her, taking care of her 2 kids. She's a single mother as she goes through cancer treatments. She's 2 more chemo treatments before she starts radiation therapy. So that's where she is right now. She's been in the hospital for the last several days because of severe pain from the chemo treatments as of the time that I'm recording this. Of course, if you'd like to send in a video question, I encourage you to go down again in the show notes, all the information on how to just film yourself, set it up on a counter or something, put it in a windowsill, and record yourself with a question. Absolutely fantastic. Makes the show really vibrant and dynamic. I love it when you guys do that. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, get in the show notes and or in the comment section and ask a question down there. Okay, on to the show. So we can't ask for things that don't exist, but why doesn't it exist? Why doesn't someone have these pricing? Why don't I, of all people, have this pricing? Because I do so much with real estate and look at houses all the time and talk to so many people, and I must have that information. And certainly I have more than the average bear, but I really don't have that much. And the reason is twofold. One, there aren't any comps. You can't look at one house on the market and determine what another is based on that. And we absolutely depend on that in the US and Canada and most other places because it's normal and that's how those markets work. So you're able to look at one of 100 houses nearby that are very similar to the one you're interested in, and from that extrapolate quite accurately what your house is going to be worth, whether it's one you own or one you're just interested in, the house that you're looking into, what it's going to be worth and about what it'll sell for. And you have a lot of market information to tell you, well, the market has gone up by 5%, nothing has sold since then, so you can take those numbers, add 5%. You know, all this information is really powerful in those large markets where you have lots of repetitive housing and a lot of repetitive housing complexes. Here in Nicaragua, we don't have repetitive housing, not outside of extreme barrio housing, and even that still has a lot of this high disparity from house to house. It's easy to go down a street and see one house directly next to another where one might be worth about $5,000 to $7,000 and the one next to it might be worth $30,000 to $50,000, right? So still not big numbers, but big disparity between neighboring houses, and that can throw things off quite a lot. It's hard to tell from the outside which is which, and so you can be on a street that looks like everything is decrepit and falling apart and it's actually all mansions, or you can be in a place that all looks pretty decent and it turns out to be basically just facades and just parking lots behind. You really don't know. And so that's really common here in Nicaragua throughout the country. Now, some places are going to get a little bit easier, like in your big developments inside Managua. And of course, if you're in a residencia, that's going to change. If you're inside a gated community where all the prices are controlled through some way, you're going to get a lot more uniformity. But even there, we see pretty big numbers. We see places advertise for new construction in gated communities where everything is controlled just as we described, and they may advertise $300,000 for a new construction of a house identical to one that's not selling today for $40,000, even out on the beach. Those are real numbers. So when you're looking at disparity like that, even in those communities, you say, wow, we may not be able to get real information about what things are worth. And if you don't have liquidity, which is a big deal here, things don't move on the market very often, having market movement information, oh, the market's 5% above where it was last week. No, we don't really have that, not in any meaningful way. So we don't have the comps horizontally on the market, and we don't have market movement to give us that vertical axis either. So we're really blind in many cases. We have a general feel of what liquidity is like. We have a very general feel over long trends of what pricing is like, but that varies in ways that are very subtle and very difficult to predict, because you need not only for you to determine what something is worth, but you also have to hope that the person you're buying from or selling to agrees with your impression of that market movement. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Very rarely are they actually in that close of agreement. So the entire process is very difficult. So what you actually end up with is basically random pricing from house to house. It's not completely random, but it's highly random. There is, of course, a market value, but determining exactly what that is, almost impossible. So mostly things come down to what people are capable of paying, willing to pay, willing to sell for, and want to sell for. And every house is absolutely unique, both as a house and as a scenario. Now, of course, the idea is that things like MLS, which is generally controlled by the government, whether directly or sort of, will provide a bit of information about market trends over time. Even if it's not completely up to date or completely accurate or completely current, it gives you a general idea. in theory. And in the US, Canada, places like that, it does. It's a highly useful tool that gives you massive amounts of statistics. And we see those statistics come out in the news all the time in the United States and presumably other places. But here in Nicaragua, there's nothing like that. There's no MLS, nor is there a government agency that could produce the data to put into one. In theory, you could, with extreme changes to the government, be able to collect all of the transaction details to theoretically have a list of every transaction, every purchase and sale of property and houses that has happened in the country over a period of time, and use that to at least identify liquidity, if nothing else, maybe to identify some trends. But even that is not something that exists today. That would be a big stretch for that to be digitized and to accumulate that information. And then the question is, how accurate is it? How often are properties changing hands that would not be collected by the system? And more importantly, it is incredibly common, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but this is reality. The average house here does not sell with all of the transaction happening on paper. So a portion of the sale will happen often extra-nationally or at least under the table, and a portion will happen on top of the table where it's visible to the government. And what's important about this is that even the government does not know what the houses are selling for. In the United States, in Canada, the government has a really good idea within a tiny margin of error of how much houses cost and what they're actively selling for, and every time that they trade hands. But here in Nicaragua, that is a lot more opaque, and there's a ton of places that they don't know about. There's also far more places that have not traded hands. Now, I don't know real averages, but in the United States, we assume that a house will often change hands, maybe an average of every 5 to 15 years. That's pretty reasonable when you first get a starter home. And we use terms like starter home because we plan to sell it before we're too old and move into a larger home. Generally, as homeowners, we expect we will own 3 or 4 houses throughout our lives. I've already owned 3 or 4 houses in the United States alone, even by the time I was just 35. Probably a bit less than that. That gives us a ton of liquidity just from the same people moving to houses more often. It also increases the amount that we pay in taxes dramatically because we pay the same transfer tax 3 or 4 times for the same group of people. Here in Nicaragua, generally when you buy a house, you assume that you're going to be living in that house for forever, or at least keeping it inside your family. And so when you purchase a house, you're expecting hundreds of years, or at least many decades, with that house, with it being passed on to children and to grandchildren without another transaction happening, instead of 3 or 4 transactions in a single adult's lifetime. So during the same time period, we may see a 10-fold increase in the turnover of a single property here in the United States versus Nicaragua. So because of that, we have, even if all other market factors were the same, we'd have 10 times the visibility into market movement and liquidity information and market trend information than we have here in Nicaragua. So because houses are held onto for so long, because the real prices and sometimes the real liquidity are not exposed to the government, because that information is not collected by any official entity, there's no way to put that all together. So while people will go out and advertise and claim that they have that information, and famously there is someone in the real estate game here, or was, who went out and claimed he had this information, which of course he did not, but claimed that he had this clairvoyance into impossible numbers that there's no way he could know. And because he was working as an agent, entire swaths of the primary real estate market completely shielded from him. So he really didn't even have a starter point. He probably, we assume, had little idea of what actual market prices were even like in the country. For all we know, he had less information than most of my audience, because at least we've taken whatever red, blue, green pill it is that lets us see that at least we know what we're seeing is fake. Doesn't mean we have the prices, but it means we know the prices we're being given are fake. So what is it that we then see? Because sometimes I do give prices when I show real estate. What I'm giving is an asking price, and I'm, as much as I can, being clear that that is what I'm stating. It's the only possible number. So there's 2 important facts you have to know. One, it's an asking price. It is not the price of the house. And in the United States, we assume that asking price is reflective of the price of the house. Here in Nicaragua, it is not. You have to assume that there's no connection. The second piece is that generally those numbers are wildly inflated and are not even used as the basis of starting negotiations. They're just random numbers that are thrown out there based on what they think is going to somehow trigger an emotional reaction to come look at the house. Or maybe because they're just lazy and they're just throwing out a number and they don't want to think about it. There's a lot of reasons why someone may give a completely fake number, and it's assumed that that's how the market will work. So anytime you're seeing a house or property or whatever, assume that the number you're being given is gibberish and just ignore it. Start from a evaluation of your own. What do you think this property is worth? And then what is it worth to you? See if you can make those things meet, and then talk to the seller and try to reach an agreement that is good for both of you. That's about all you can do. And of course, people will ask me, how do I come up with those numbers if I don't have all these other things? We talk about this a lot in the videos. There is no way around getting here, being on the ground, talking to people, doing your own investigation, taking some risks. That is an intrinsic part of the game. Real estate is not a big investment thing here for this reason, and probably others. But because there isn't this relatively guaranteed liquidity with predictable pricing, doing real estate investing here is a highly risky endeavor. Plus, the interest rates for borrowing to buy property are extremely high and onery. And so because of that, you really don't have real estate as an investment the way that you do in, say, the North American markets. People aren't doing that. So everything about this market is different, and you really have to internalize that and understand that, one, what you do see is fake, or it is listing prices. So we're telling you this is not a real number. Please don't let it guide you, but we do need to repeat something where people don't know what to do, but also be prepared. If you ask, what should this property be, unless you've gotten an expert who's putting in a ton of time researching for you for that one particular property, and make sure that expert is not a real estate agent, make sure they're an actual property expert who's in the local market, in that extremely local spot, and have been looking at it for years, and assume that the best thing you're going to get is a really wild opinion based on very scattered information, doing the best that they can do. That's about all we have to work with here. It is a challenging market, but it will certainly be more challenging if you work from the wrong perspective. If you approach it incorrectly, you will set yourself up to make it so much more difficult and so much more risky. So we just want to protect you and give you the tools to at least get started down a good path. Thank you so much for joining me. Like and subscribe if you'd like to help support the channel. As I said earlier, buy me that coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Alan Miller. Please hit the show notes, check out all of our social media and other channels. Watch another episode that does make a huge difference. Trust me, send this to someone you know who's interested in Nicaragua and needs to be warned about real estate problems here and challenges and ways that they can accidentally set themselves up for failure. Head that off of the pass. Make sure that they know these aren't things they can do. And yes, it's going to be a challenge, but if you put in that effort, you're going to get better deals than everyone else. You're going to be the big winner, but you can't shortcut the process. You will definitely be the one who loses. I will see all of you tomorrow.